So hello to everyone who has joined us and welcome to tonight's event, the launch of Noopiming, the Cure for White Ladies. My name is Elisa. I work at the D+Q bookstore. And Librairie D+Q would like to acknowledge that our events and bookstores are located on the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka. Many of us refer to Montreal as home, but its name is Tiohtià:ke. It has always been a gathering place for many First Nations and continues to be a home to a diverse population of Indigenous peoples. We are grateful that creating and sharing stories has been a part of this land for thousands of years, and we urge you to seek out a story that's different from your own. Tonight, we have two fantastic authors with us. The first being Catherine Hernandez. Catherine is a proud queer woman of color, a radical mother, a theater practitioner, an award-winning author, and the artistic director of Be Current Performing Arts. She is of Filipino, Spanish, Chinese, and Indian heritage, and she is married into the Navajo Nation. Her novel Scarborough, which is soon to be a motion picture, won the Jim Wong Chu Award for the unpublished manuscript, was a finalist for the Toronto Book Award, the Evergreen Forest of Reading Award, the Edmund White Award, and the Trillium Book Award, and was longlisted for Canada Reads. She has also written the plays Sing Kill and Kilt Pins, as well as the children's book M is for Mustache, a Pride ABC book. Crosshairs is her second novel and is right here. And she lives in Toronto. And of course, we have with us Leanne Betasamosake Simpson. Leanne is a Mississauga Nishnaabeg writer, scholar, and musician, and a member of the Alderville First Nation. She is the author of 5 previous books, As We Have Always Done, Islands of Decolonial Love, The Gift is in the Making, Dancing on Our Turtle's Back, and This Accident of Being Lost, which was a MacEwan Book of the Year, won the Peterborough Arts Award for Outstanding Achievement by an Indigenous Author, was finalist for the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize and the Trillium Book Award, was longlisted for CBC Canada Reads, and was the best book of the year by the Globe and Mail, the National Post, and Quill and Choir. She's released 2 albums, including Flight, which is a companion piece to This Accident of Being Lost. So welcome, Catherine and Leanne. I cannot wait to hear your conversation, and I'll turn things over to the two of you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am deeply honored to be here to guide the conversation with Leanne. As mentioned, we are celebrating the launch of this courageous, imaginative, brilliant book, Noopiming. And before I get going with all of my questions, because I have so many of them, I wanted to welcome Leanne to read for us if possible. I think that's what everyone's looking forward to, is just listening to you let these words lift off the page. So I'll leave it to you.
Oh, well, Anikinewaya, it's amazing to be virtually in Kanien'kehá:ka territory in Tiohtià:ke. I'm so honored to be in conversation with Catherine. I've been reading this amazing piece of brilliance while I'm waiting for the election results like everybody else. And so I'd encourage you to pick that up. I'm so excited that the John Quarterly has put this event together, and I'm so grateful that all of you are sharing your Thursday evening with us. I'm going to start by reading the beginning of Noopiming. Noopiming is a word in Anishinaabe that means in the bush. And what else can I say? The first part, the beginning of the book, is called Solidification. And when I was thinking about how I wanted this book, the work that I wanted this book to do, and how I wanted this book to travel in the world, the pandemic was a challenge, because I didn't, at the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know if things like this were going to happen. And so I was talking to my sister, Ansley Simpson, who is a singer-songwriter in Toronto, and we put together an album of 4 readings and original music from her and James Button. and we released it as the Noopiming sessions as a way of sort of adding another layer of artistic, creative force to the work. And then Sammy Chian from Vancouver did a video. So the videos of this reading, and I'm going to be doing the a cappella version tonight. And if you're interested, you can go on the internet and find the video. Solidification. Once you move through cold, there is Pacific. Once you move through Pacific, there is placid. Once you move through placid, there is a condition of expanse. And it was in that condition of expanse that held me. I heard them singing above me. Mashkawaji fell through the ice to find quiet, to get out of the wind, to visit with Namegos. They all sang, Mashkawaji stitches up the hole. They are so cold, they can't move. They are frozen stiff. The lake is their blanket. They all sang, Mashkawaji is frozen stiff, still, calm. No one knows if they're coming back. They all sang, Akiwenzii is fishing through the ice with a spear. They brought a line of beads. They will wait patiently. They will wait patiently until Mashkawaji is done their visit. The singing and drumming came every night from a distance. Different choirs every evening at dusk, marking the passage of time, reminding me there is still love. You see, tragedy happened again. The details don't matter because the details are hopeless, overwhelmed, shut down. Know this, after 2 years, the best parts of me are still frozen in the lake. My limbic system, its best friend, the prefrontal cortex, and the hollow pumping organ in which I keep benevolence. The only one that regularly comes to visit is Akiwenzii. In the winter, they park the truck on the ice, drill a hole with an auger, and fish until the cold makes their bones crack. As soon as the ice is off the lake, Akiwenzii is back in their boat with a torch and a sort of pitchfork for spearing pickerel. In the dead of summer, Akiwenzii sneaks back before first light in their canoe, before the cottagers and their jet skis are out. In the fall, they sprinkle tobacco around me and sing. My world is muted. I look out. If something upsets me, I just wait, and the upset passes. I sit beside. Sometimes I remember the other me before I was frozen in the lake. I remember caring and engaging and the sharpness of unmuted feeling. I remember hopeless connection. I don't feel stuck, in part because I don't feel anything. Their song isn't wrong. The ice is like a warm, weighted blanket. My form dissolved when tragedy came, and if I am fluid, the ice is container. There are ashes in my eyes. I am so far inside myself, like Mashkawaji on a full fast, inside time, pulled inside their organs, inside their turtle shell, inside the sediments of the lake, while the ice world forms on top, oblivious to the outside, with body as lake. And there is solace in being cut off. And there is freedom enmeshed within that state. Know this, being frozen in the lake is another kind of life. Know this, it is unclear how long before I will be done with my visit. It's unclear how long visiting takes. Know this, visiting is more of a dance than an event. Akiwenzii is my will. Ninaatig is my lungs. Mindimooyenh is my conscience. Sabe is my marrow. Adik is my nervous system. Asin is my eyes and ears. Lucy is my brain. I believe everything these seven say because ice distorts perception and trust replaces critique, examination, interrogation. I believe everything these seven say, even though, I believe everything these 7 say, even though their truths are their own, not mine. I believe in the absence of my own heart. I will accept the hearts of these 7. The geese fly overhead in the sheer grace of a carefully angled formation designed to take them elsewhere. There are still stars. There are still stars. Thank you.
You know, because we don't have that public engagement, so I'm here for this. I'm here for this. Oh, Leanne, thank you. That, you know, I love hearing you read, and I'm so glad that we're part of this event together, just so that I could hear your words up in the air, so we can breathe it all in. I just wanted to encourage the people that are out there. First off, thank you so much for joining us. But to remember to put your questions in the Q&A section, please. That way I can read them all off, and we're going to try to get to your questions at some point during this evening. But do use the Q&A section. That way it doesn't get buried in the chat. So let's start. Let's discuss this brilliant book. I would love to ask you, is that first off, is I wanted to know what the seeds were of for this book, and also if you could just, because I found it almost ineffable to describe it, is that how you would describe your book to people if you were to tell them what it was about?
I think I wanted to center an Anishinaabe presence in the present. I wanted to build an Anishinaabe world where the characters of this world, there were some older characters, there's younger characters, there's characters that are trees, there's characters that are existing in this spiritual realm, there's characters that sort of transform. I wanted to create this world in the present because I think Anishinaabe people and Indigenous people and Black and Brown people are constantly building worlds and then living in them in the present. And I think that world building, that practice of world building is really, really beautiful. And so I wanted to have this completely Anishinaabe world in spite of colonialism, in spite of all of the challenges and barriers in the city, on the North Shore of Lake Ontario, in these little fragments of bush. And I wanted to create sort of pockets of joy and pockets of humor, and show the persistence and the resistance and the beauty of I think my people.
Beautiful. Do you remember a moment where you knew, I don't know if you have the same feeling as an author, but sometimes there's like a moment in time where you go, oh, the book is being born out of me. Do you remember that moment for this?
I don't remember a moment like that. I remember, or maybe this is the moment. The moment for me is when I just want to live inside my book. And I don't want to cook or drive people places or go to the grocery store. I just want these 7 characters. I just want to visit with them in my head, where I become kind of so immersed in the project or in the worlds that I'm creating that I just want to spend time there. And I think that is probably the point where the book is being born.
Wow. And yeah, and speaking of worlds, is that I felt like every morsel of this book is that you were handing us this I would say like a handful of puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit together. So you have like this unlikely meeting of tradition and an unkind world, in which, like, you have people offering sama at a fake plant in IKEA, the videos of campfires and lodges made out of election signs, and I feel it too. I really felt that section with regards to the city protocols around fire. so tell me about that, because I felt the sensation going through my body reading your book was almost like a feeling of feeling unsettled, feeling this ineffable unease because these pieces weren't quite fitting together. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about that from you.
I think that that's what it feels like for me to be a Nishnaabeg. We're always trying to put the pieces back together, but we don't even really know what the whole puzzle looks like, and we don't have all the pieces. And so it's this continual search for belonging. It's a search for connection. It's a search to be part of that kind of complex network of relationships that built our worlds and that built our societies in the past, and that are so important to us in the present. And so I feel like for me that I feel kind of affirmed to have that experience of colonialism, or experience of living in 2020 as an Anishinaabe person. It feels affirming to have that kind of fragment, and that almost, it's like there's a code that you're trying to figure out. There's pieces that you're trying to get back of yourself, of the way, of your language, of the way that you think of connection. Connection to land, connection to ancestors, connection to that next generation that's coming. So I think I wanted to explore that in these characters, and look at all of the different ways that they're finding ways to connect anyway.
Yes, is that it's not a disconnect, but it's trying to figure out like what is the sort of the adapter piece to sort of move towards that direction. And it was brilliant. And because of that, I want to read this one from your blurbs from Omar El-Akkad, the best-selling author of American War. I don't know what he knows about writing, but whatever. I don't know if we can trust him. But Noopiming is a rare parcel of beauty and power, at once a creator and destroyer of forms. I thought that that's a wonderful way. I mean, like his blurb wasn't as good as my blurb, but I think that I find that that's a great way to describe your book. And I wondered, because, being a racialized author, Thea Motanji and I were in a workshop recently, speaking with people about what it's like to be someone who is racialized and is dealing with the editing process, and talking about how we can be respected and respectful in the process, to ensure that the ways in which we tell stories are honored. Can you tell me a little bit about that, being someone who obviously it's such an imaginative, innovative way of storytelling? What is it like for you in the editing process to ensure that your vision is being acknowledged and respected, for many of us here who might be watching and are in a very similar situation? What is that like for you?
It often is scary. I worked with Damian Rogers, who's a white woman and who's a writer, and she actually has an amazing book out called An Alphabet for Joanna. And I had worked with her in this accident of being lost. And so I was just very, very, very honest right from the beginning with Damian, and she heard me, and she worked. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to be her. She worked so hard to understand artistically and creatively and culturally what I was trying to do, and put so much energy into building a relationship of trust with me, that I asked, actually, when Anansi acquired the rights to Noopiming, that I could work with her again, because I felt like we had both really invested in that relationship. I find that as an Indigenous writer, I need to have I need to have my own sort of editors and people close to me that I trust their feedback first, so that I know that what I'm writing is doing what I'm intending it to do, so that I know that Anishinaabe people and Indigenous people are feeling good and seen and affirmed in my work. And then I think that's part of my process before it gets into the hands of agents and publishers and books, because I think that's a very difficult navigation. There's a lot of racism, there's a lot of misunderstanding, there's a lot of there's a very specific way to write books in order to be successful at this. There's the whole industry is very white, and while this is changing, I think it's very important for racialized writers to use their words and use their voice and advocate for your work, and that's extremely difficult to do as an emerging writer. So it's very important. It's been very important to me to sort of build a community around my writing outside of the industry, in order to make sure that I'm getting better, and that I'm doing what I think that I'm doing, and that what my intentions are with the work are coming through.
Yeah, we discussed that a lot, about like being really honest with yourself as to where you can do better, and also really trusting your belly button feelings when you feel that you're being pushed to a place that doesn't feel right. Because there's like the discomfort of like, and I find it almost like a delicious discomfort when I'm being pushed to a place that I'm like, oh, I'm being challenged to do better. And then there's another place that you could be pushed, which feels like I'm not being challenged, they're being challenged because my material is too much for them, is you know, too loud, too much me, you know, like all of those things are really interesting. That's good to, I love the fact that you sort of established something, like there's like a conversation beforehand about where you stand. I think that that's a really great piece of advice for a lot of us. And I think, I don't know if you've ever felt this way, Leanne, but early on in my career is that I felt like I was just going to be really, really nice and just go through the editing process and not say anything until it was almost too late. And now I just feel like I have such a great, such great conversations with editors, that I feel that we're on the same page, and that also there could be some pushback if there's like, you know, fuckery going on. Like how does that that resonate at all with what has happened in your career?
I think that I've always been really suspicious, and I've always pushed back against making my work more accessible to white people, because my work often gets labeled as not being easy and being challenging. It's not following genre. It's not translating the words that I'm using. There's inside jokes in it. And I want that. That's deliberate. That's deliberate because as an Indigenous reader, when I was growing up, it felt like no one wrote books for me. And so I think we've all, like racialized writers and racialized readers, have this feeling where, you know, this book isn't, I'm not the audience here. This is doing, this isn't just drawing me in and affirming my experience and speaking to me. This is something that's educating white people. And so I pushed back against that. And write for that Indigenous audience first, that racialized audience first. And then I think the work is accessible to non-Indigenous people and to white people, but I think sometimes they have to learn to read differently, there's work that has to be done. And that's okay with me. And I've found publishers that it's okay with, but I think it means that you also have to kind of redefine success. And you have to look at your career a little differently, because there's particular kinds of books that publishers like to publish, and that white readers like to buy. And when you're sort of challenging form and challenging voice and challenging some of those conventions in order to create space for a group of readers that historically have been marginalized within the culture of reading and the culture of literature, then you write different stuff. And I think that's good. And there's a lot of us doing that work right now. But I do think it's really hard when you're an emerging writer and you're just learning your practice. And so you don't know, it's harder. It was harder for me to tell what's racism and what's unfair pushback and what's actually, oh, that I'm not as good as I think I am. That is actually a good point. Now that I'm older, I'm better at detecting that.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, I think that that's it. It's like, it's about practice, because I think, yeah, I mean, like, allies actually have to practice allyship, and we also have to practice the pushback, and you get better at it with time, right? So yeah, I'm so curious. Your writing is the kind of writing where I'm always curious about, like, where you're sitting, what you're doing throughout the day, what it looks like what your process looks like, especially because of the fact that I think you had used the word layer with regards to music, the layers of artistic expression that goes into a story for you. Can you tell us a little bit about this? I'm so curious about your writing process, especially for this book.
I'm super busy, and I feel like one of the things that I have to do as a writer is I have to live an interesting life, and so that's a bit of a challenge under the pandemic when I don't leave the house. So my practice of writing has never looked like I go up to my nice writing studio and have some coffee and smoke cigarettes and type my books out on my typewriter. I've always had like lots of kids and no space and no time. And so it's my books have been written like on the back of napkins in sandboxes at parks. They're written on the running trail. I often write in my head first, and then whenever I get a chance to sit down at a computer. For this book, I got up really early in the morning, like 4:30 or 5 for about 6 months, and I would write until my kids they're older kids now, until they would need me at 10:30 or 11 in the morning. And I just did that every single morning. So I would get to see the sunrise, and I would get to spend time with these characters. And I couldn't do that obviously when my kids were younger. But that's the real gift of teenagers. They sleep in.
Yeah, I've got a 16-year-old myself. Yeah, it's definitely a different game. But you know what's so funny is that I knew it. I was reading it, wondering whether or not you were writing it quite early in the morning, just because that's such a magical time, where you feel like whatever mischief the spiritual world has been doing, that they're finally like dying down. And then as we're starting to wake up, we just catch up a little bit of that magic. And then we go on through the day pretending that everything was normal. But I had a feeling when I was reading this that it seemed to capture this kind of this a morning light kind of feeling.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was
nice.
Really great. And then tell me too about the layers of artistic expression, because of the fact that you are a multidisciplinary artist, and like how that affects your writing.
I think writing is a very solitary sort of endeavor, where you spend a lot of time in your head. And so, and I have an academic background where you also spend a lot of time, all of your time actually, from here up. And so it's been later in life where I was actually, when my kids were little, I ran a language nest, so that they could start to learn some of their language. And there was a lot of theater people, and we were doing lots of theater games to learn the language, because kids love that, because it's kinetic and it's fun. And I had a lot of trouble with that, because I was like, I don't want to move my body. I'll think about it. I'll write a good paper about it, but I don't want to actually do it. And so it was my kids in this group that sort of got me interested in performance and being more embodied and actually living in my body. and taking my body back. And I was also super interested in collaborating with other artists. I come from, in my culture, we tell a lot of oral stories. And I think that's where I don't have sort of the traditional education in writing. I didn't go to creative writing school, but I have a lot of these oral stories that are also very layered and that have different meanings and that are designed to be told over and over and over again, that are designed to be carried with you throughout your life, that sort of shift depending on the audience and depending on circumstances. So I wanted to have my work kind of coded so that there's some knowledge in the story that I think only Anishinaabe people will be able to decode, but there's enough meaning that other people can come into the story and can find meaning as well. So that's a really Anishinaabe aesthetic through layering. And then I just some of the poetry. My sister and I have done this Noopiming Sessions album that was just kind of a COVID project. And then some of the stories the poems right in the middle of the book, I've made into songs, and that's an album that's now kind of a separate project from the book, but the lyrics and are based on that poetry, and it's coming out in March. So I think that getting back into my body and being able to go up to a microphone and with confidence and take my space as an Indigenous woman was the gift for me of that language nest. And it just opened, it gave me a confidence I don't think that I had before. And I really like, when I'm performing music, I really like to create those kind of bubbles that you create in performance where you're connecting with the audience and where you're sharing energy back and forth. And that's sort of what I'm trying to do with my writing as well. But I'm never with you guys when you're reading my book, so I have no idea what happens. There's like that distance. So yeah, I think performance has been a really, really important part of my writing process now, to the point where I read everything out loud when I'm editing. The rhythm has to sound right. It has to have a rhythm to it, or it gets edited.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious when you are reading it that it does feel like it had been edited out loud, and it sounds beautiful. And it's funny when we're talking about multidisciplinary work, like working with a lot of racialized theater artists, is that I always tell them, it's like, before colonization, it was just called storytelling, because the storytelling, like the way that we told stories, was through, like, for the brown and black diaspora, is that it was always multidisciplinary. That's just how you told a story. And the lines between, like, where your body and the words, where the body ends and the words begin, right? I don't feel that those lines were necessarily there, at least in my oral traditions.
No, I don't feel like that either. And I love thinking about that, because everyone was a storyteller, and everyone was a singer. It wasn't just certain people that were deemed good enough to do it. It was something that was a practice of the community. It was a communal practice, and everybody had this voice. And I think that point about the kind of that you're making about the boundaries between body and sound and words is one that I like, that interstitial space. I find it really generative to think about the ways of blurring that.
Yeah, there was something that I was like really finding interesting when I was growing up. The traditions that I was learning were that our bodies as a group create a geometric shape that says what happened during the harvest, or what happened during the hunt, or the loss of somebody in the community, or whatever, right? And so geometrically, we'd make that using choreography, right?
Yeah.
And in a way, it's like, how different is the geometry of the body and the geometry of letters to make written word? Nothing really. So I love that. I love speaking to artists who do layers of things in order to strengthen the message at this time. So before I forget, because it's now 7:35 and I don't want to miss anybody's questions. Because that's just the worst, is when a facilitator is like, my questions are more important than yours. So here is our first question from Jeanette Platena. The literary term trauma writing is emerging. It is characterized by non-linearity and by what I would have called magic realism. I wonder what you think of the term trauma writing, which is non-linear, unstuck from time and place. Is it traumatized writing or non-colonialized writing?
I think it's a good practice to always ask that question when writing gets labeled like that. I think very carefully. I thought very carefully about trauma in Noopiming and how I wanted to write about trauma and how I didn't want to write about trauma. Because on one hand, I want to be truthful about sort of the realities that I live in and the realities of my life. And I feel like if you're racialized or Indigenous or Black, there's trauma of racism and anti-Blackness and colonialism and all of those things. We have experiences with violence. And in this book, I wanted to kind of gesture towards them, but I didn't want to center them. So I was trying to figure out a way. We have this main character in the book that's frozen in the lake. We know that they're shut down because they've experienced some kind of trauma, but that's all you know. And then this other life sort of comes out of that. So I think we have to think really carefully about balancing the truth telling around trauma and then how that it's really easy for that trauma in a colonial society, in a white supremacist society, to get commodified and to get sold and to get used in a different way. So I think it's always good to be thinking about those kinds of things and what kind of stories are palatable, what kind of stories are successful, what kinds of stories are sellable, and what kinds are more marginalized within our writing communities. It's important to think critically about all of those kinds of labels and to reject the ones that don't hold meaning for us.
Thank you. Just a reminder for anybody who has any questions to use the Q&A section and not the chat. So here's another question from Cleopatra Peterson. Do you still have to fight to include Indigenous language in your writing? I know you've spoken about this before, but Noopiming was so full, which was such a joy to experience.
So early on in my career, I remember having to fight to not have Anishinaabe words italicized, to not have them othered, to just have them in the text as normal. And then the next sort of fight was to not have them immediately translated. And then the next kind of fight was in Noopiming to not have them translated at all. That was always my intention. I feel like I have an established relationship with Anansi now and with the editor. And so I didn't get a lot of pushback then. There's also the Ojibwe People's Dictionary is online. And so I had ahead of time gone through and 90% of the words people can figure out through Googling. And so I know that in speaking with younger Indigenous writers, that it is something that we still have to advocate for and that we still have to fight for. But I think that's one thing that's gotten a little bit easier in the last few years.
That's great. It's great to hear that it's like slowly but surely being accepted, because there are a lot of words that racialized people have to accept about white folks. Like we hear words all the time when people sort of drop that, the little bit of French just to sound fancy, and the expectation for us to sort of understand what is being said. And I get it. I get it. Like, yeah, and I love the fact that you're. That's something that I'm struggling with too, is to feel brave enough to not italicize, just to leave it up to the reader to decide, like to look it up or whatever. Thank you. We have another question here from Katia Gosselin. How much influence does the community have on the work you do?
It depends what you mean by the community. So I feel like I am accountable to the people in my life, in my house, pretty intensely, and I feel accountable to a larger community as well. But first to those people in my house. I've worked with an elder, Doug Williams, who I've talked about and written about for 20 years, and so he is somebody that has mentored me, has taught me all kinds of things, and we have a close friendship. And so I feel like his influence over a lot of the Anishinaabe concepts is pretty clear. I think that I have to give, or I've learned to give myself permission to tell my story and to tell my truths and to be responsible and accountable for that. I think the Anishinaabe community is very diverse. We have lots of different experiences with colonialism. And I think that there's lots of different kinds of writing that are being written. And I think that diversity is a really, really, really great thing. So I think that I live my life in a way that I think I'm continually trying to be ethical and accountable to the people that I'm in community with. And that makes my writing is a part of that.
Thank you. I love that, being accountable to the people in your house. Yeah, I love that. I'm sure my teenager would rather me be more accountable to her. Another question from someone by the name of Darcy White. When I read this accident of being lost, it read to me as quite queer and possibly even polyamorous. Was that me reading into the work, or was it actually there in the work?
It was, I feel like it was there in the work, but it was also written in a way that that's one of the ways that you could interpret it. So I wanted to have this reflection of Anishinaabe life. We have more than two genders. We have a diversity of relationship orientations, a diversity of sexual orientations, and this diversity of gender. And I wanted to present that as normal in this accident of being lost. And then I wanted to deepen that in Noopiming. So there's, so I think that's why the 7 main characters use the they, them pronouns, and people see different genders in them, and some people see queerness and some people don't. And I think that the idea was that I wanted all genders and all sexual orientations to be able to see themselves in the work and not feel excluded by reading it. But so I wanted to do sort of a queer as normal, where there can also be heterosexual people, but it's just life. It's just normal. It's just, this is the world that we built.
Yeah, I love for Noopiming with the use of they, them pronouns. My language as well. It's you refer to people. The pronoun is always they, them. And there are many languages like that around the world that do that. And I think it was a wonderful challenge for me to sort of deprogram my brain, is that basically everyone is going to be using this pronoun. It's wonderful. We have another question, this time by someone who is anonymous. How important is it for you to have audio versions of your writing with regards to oral storytelling traditions?
I don't know if I've ever thought about that. I think that the audio versions, again, I think particularly the ones that are read by actors and not myself, I think that adds another kind of layer of artistic interpretation, which I like. I think it's another kind of medium that opens up to folks that might not want to read or would prefer to or can't read, or so they can listen to the audio. I think the act of oral storytelling and the oral tradition is quite different than making an audiobook. There's a different set of ethics, there's a different history, there's a different set of relationships. So I wouldn't equate the two. That's not the oral tradition to me. The oral tradition to me is when I'm out on the reserve having a fire or a feast or doing a ceremony and people are laughing and telling stories kind of informally and communally. That's sort of what I think of as the oral tradition. And I think the oral tradition and that set of skills and those spaces are really, really important. I don't think that can be replaced by audiobooks or written books. I think that act of getting together around the fire and telling stories that's a practice in and of itself.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I love that, what you just said, because I feel like what makes oral storytelling different is the fact that it's fleeting, and that it's not something you can rewind or whatever. And it's understood that I'm going to tell you the story again and again and again so that it's in your body.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's a very different thing than having an audiobook so that I can go and mow the lawn
right.
and knit while listening to an audiobook. And because the reason why it's fleeting, I feel, is that the idea is that we're going to commune on a regular basis to say the story again and again, because it has to be ingrained in you, and that the understanding is that you're going to do the same thing to a future generation. But there's no expectation for an audiobook for you to pass on that audiobook to anybody else. I think that's
what I love that kind of the process. I love to think about the process of getting a story into your body, into your bones, in making yourself out of the story. And it's always amazing to me hearing a story over and over and over again, and then like at year 15, like the light bulb finally goes off and the story, like you're like, oh. I find that the same actually about performing music sometimes with these songs. Like you will play the same song night after night after night in different cities, and then all of a sudden after like 2 years you're like, wow, like is that what I meant? That's the song sort of reveals something to you. And I think that's through that process of getting it into your body and being in relationship to a whole bunch of other people and having it fleeting. Like that's such a special, magical, amazing experience that I think we need more of.
Yeah.
She says on Zoom.
Yeah. Also, I just love the fact that oral storytelling, I love how it just grows and changes. Mm-hmm. So that, that story that you told about that lady at the grocery store ends up being like this 3-hour-long treatise on something.
Yeah.
Something. But I love it. I love it. So Katya is asking, when will this book be translated into French?
It's in the works. Yeah.
Yeah. So great. Fantastic. So you can stay tuned, Katya, for that. Alicia Piercy asks, can you talk about how you conceived of the voice of the character of the tree in terms of human and non-human relations? Yes. Sorry, I love that. Sorry, I really love that character. I don't know why I had to say that question so loud, but yes.
Ninaatig is a maple tree, and I've spent a decade working in a sugar bush and having relationships with maple trees. There's another tree in Peterborough in kind of an urban park that's one of the oldest trees in our territory, and I have a relationship with that tree. I wrote a poem that became a song, that's a video. And so I think it was really, really natural to me, particularly this one old tree that I visited now for the last 5 or 6 years, to make that old one into a character I always think, because this tree is like 400 years old, so what has this tree witnessed? This tree is, we share this space, we share this time together. What is that? What is that friendship? What is that like? And so I used sort of my relationship with that tree to develop this character and develop the story around Ninaatig. And I fell in love with Ninaatig, and I still think about them. So rad with the shopping cart.
I dog-eared the page with regards to Ninaatig's remembering the first ceremonies, like the sugar making ceremonies. I read it again and again today, read it to my partner, just because I was so amazed by that piece of writing, especially when I don't want to give away too much, but it's just this idea of being also in community with other trees, because I definitely feel that there's like a conversation that I'm walking in on every time I walk towards the Rouge River. But you did such a splendid job with that particular character. My absolute fave. That was my fave.
Thank you.
We have a question here. Maybe then with regards to this question about white women, so the cure for white ladies, and as well, I would love to sort of pair with that, like, your thoughts on the cover and how this striking this striking image came to be.
So I think this is when I say that when the title comes over the loudspeaker, there's always giggles with brown people and indigenous people, and I feel like that's one of the meanings of the cure for white ladies. But I was really thinking of Susanna Moodie, who was a white woman who was writing in the mid 1800s. She was a settler, and she wrote a book called Roughing It in the Bush. And it was a guide for settlers and pioneers who were coming over and colonizing my land, my homeland. And she's celebrated by the canon and by Canadian literature because she's one of the first women writers in Canada, and she should be celebrated. And she was also very, very racist and anti-Black in her writing, and she caused it, not her, but that time period and her family were part of this kind of violent dispossession of my people. And so I was thinking about that, and I've written about her before in my academic work. So she's sort of the white lady that I'm referencing in the title. And the book is The Cure, and she's not in the book. It's just Anishinaabe people. It's just Anishinaabe people living our lives in Anishinaabe worlds anyway. And that's the world that Susanna Moodie missed when she came to my territory. That was the world that her white supremacy couldn't see, didn't allow her to see. And so rather than sort of engaging in the scathing critique of her, which other people have done, in which I have done a little bit of, I just wanted to use it as a jumping off point and be like, we're still here, we're amazing, we have great stories, we're funny, we're intelligent, we're doing ceremony in IKEA when you're not looking, like we're still here. So I wanted to kind of celebrate that that kind of resistance and persistence and love, just profound love. And then the cover is by Rebecca Belmore. I felt like that cover shows a wound and it's stitched up. And I feel like that's also an experience of being Indigenous in the world. You're constantly stitching up these holes. You're constantly healing from this hurt, from the pain. And I loved that it was the reclining figure. It added, again, another visual layer of knowledge and meaning to the work. And I think that I hope that the work that the novel does is it stitched up some of my holes I hope it stitches up some other people's holes too.
Beautifully said. There is a question here. Do you connect with what Thomas King had said about "I am not the Indian you had in mind"?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's something that's another lesson I think of performance, because every time I walk onto stage and I step up to the mic, particularly with white audiences, they have in mind what an Indigenous, they have all these assumptions or stereotypes or understandings of what an Indigenous woman looks like, what Indigenous music should sound like, and when I speak into the mic, I shatter a lot of those stereotypes. So I think that when Thomas King is saying that, he's speaking back to those stereotypes. And I think that my generation and this next generation of Indigenous writers are doing more than kind of speaking back. They're like annihilating them, which is awesome.
Was there a particular, because there's obviously multiple perspectives in this book, was there a particular character that you connected with the most?
I really love all of the characters. I think that like Mindimooyenh, Akiwenzii, Ninaatig. I like the caribou character as well. I think the older, I really love working with elders, and I think those characters, but I really liked also the sort of interactions of the generations in the book, and how there are some things that old Kukum sees and just has no problem calling it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, what's so funny is that I really got a sense of that reading your book, was that you loved them. That's what it was like. It's that all of them were handled with such care, and there was such tenderness with how everything was described, and like always with love. Like that's what it felt like. All of their faults, their quirks, and everything. It felt quite alive for me. It was really wonderful. In the last few minutes, maybe the thing that I wanted to ask you about was humor. Tell me about how you used humor in this book, and how you use humor as an author.
I feel like Anishinaabe people, this is part that comes from the community. We're always laughing. There are very few situations that I have been in where people aren't joking, and it's a way of healing. It's a way of coping. It's a way of taking back that joy. And so I wanted to reflect that in the characters. It's something that's made my life better. And I appreciate people who are really funny. My sister Shannon is so funny. And so I just wanted to have these characters. I feel like the world is heavy enough, and I wanted to just have some space for joy and connection.
Wow. I think I'm going to try to get to the last two questions, but let's start with this one. What are your thoughts on sci-fi fantasy as a genre for worlding and decolonial imaginaries?
I think there's a lot of Indigenous writers who are writing some fantastic stuff in those genres. I think that for me, in this book, there's this idea of dawn, because when I was writing, I was watching the sunrise every day. Our word being bedabin, that first light, the past and the future collapsing in on the present. So I think in terms of oral storytelling, those elements of fantasy and sci-fi are kind of built into Anishinaabe stories anyway, because we relate to time a little bit differently.
Wonderful. I think this is an important question. We're going to try to fit this in right now because I think given the reality, we should ask this question. And so someone, Cristina Morano is asking, what sustains you when you are tired?
I think that I have learned that it is best if Leanne doesn't get tired. So I have learned now, particularly from being a parent, that I need to do the things on a daily basis that sort of prevent me from getting to that point where I can no longer speak sentences or be kind. And so I think in my practice of life, I try to manage myself so I am not, so that I don't get pushed to that position. I do get pushed to that position. And I think in those situations, what sustains me are things like that big old maple tree or the Rouge River or the lake, or thinking of what my ancestors have lived through and sacrificed and the resistance that they engaged in to make sure that I got here. And so I think that I try to feel, when I start to think about that, I start to feel pretty grateful and pretty privileged, and then I just get some sleep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we are very, very grateful that you've cared for yourself enough that you could deliver us this beautiful piece of work. And again, here it is, Noopiming, which is available. Please try and find your local indie bookstore to support them in buying this beautiful piece of work. I appreciate your time giving us an idea, like a little bit of a window into what your life as a writer is like, what the seeds were for this this very important book that everyone should read. And also, I'm just really excited for all of the niche folks who will be reading your book and seeing themselves in the words that you create. So thank you so very much for all of this. And thank you for Drawn Quarterly for having us here. Thank you to all of you for joining us for tonight, taking the time and out from this weird chapter in history. So thank you very much. And so I'll pass it on to Elisa in order to bring us on home.
Thank you so much, both of you, Leanne and Catherine. That was such a wonderful conversation to witness, to be a part of. Thank you both so much for your time and your thoughts. Thank you as well to everyone who joined us. There were so many of us, so it was so special. If you'd like to purchase the books that we've talked about, we encourage you to do so through the Drawn Quarterly bookstore. We have a web store and we ship across Canada. We have Noopiming, we have Crosshairs, we have a variety of older titles. Here's some examples of those. Brought them home today with me. So you can go to mtl.drawnandquarterly.com for our web store. And also if you'd like to see more of our upcoming events as well. So yeah, I think we'll probably round things off now, but thank you everyone. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Thanks, Drawn and Quarterly. Thank you for coming, Miigwech. Go on in.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.